Hi, folks. Nice to see everybody's faces. Uh, I'm Jason Alderman. I'll be emceeing our memorial for Fred today. I'm so glad you guys are all here. Thank you for it. Let me share with you the program for the next hour or so is put together by the currently masked but nose out Bob Klein. We'll hear from Murray Grossman and then his kids, Brian and Sarah Grossman. We'll then hear from a Bantam cluster, Richard Hunt, Esther Margolis, and Paul Fedorko. Susan Gilbranson will then speak. Gail Eichenthal and CJ Cox will then speak. Ian Hunt and Daniel Alderman will be together. And we'll end the formal portion with Bob. And at the end, we will open the floor. If you're moved to speak, to have a memory of Fred or something you want to share with us, we would love to hear it then. From a logistical standpoint, speakers, I will unmute you when it's your time, though if you've got a funky name that I can't tell who you are, I might ask for your help with that, waving and flagging. And then at the end of the program, if you're not one of the official speakers, but you want to speak, just make yourself super visible to me like that, and I'll unmute you. I want to just make sure that when people are speaking, we have everybody muted. So that's why I have sort of the ultra mute option on now. So with that, let me share some of my memories of Fred. And Fred would have loved that all of us have come together today to celebrate him. He relished having the spotlight on him, and somehow, and only Fred could pull this off, his love of that spotlight was not egotistical, but it was charming and endearing. For those of you who don't know, Fred was technically my first cousin once removed. I'm Tom Alderman's son, and Tom and Fred were first cousins. But having Fred be my first cousin once removed doesn't even remotely do him justice, which is why my family and I always called him Uncle Fred. And I think for many of you, he was an uncle to you as well in some way, shape, or form. I think you also all experienced how ridiculously generous Fred was with others, with probably all of you. And at the same time, he was so frugal. He was like the most frugal person any of us knew. And he was known for swiping newspapers from his neighbors, from local hotels, and even from one fateful week in 1990 from the Iraqi embassy in Washington, D.C. Fred was also very giving with his time. He read every manuscript from each aspiring author who sent it to him, and he always found ways to give them productive, kind feedback. After he retired, Fred volunteered at every organization that would ever have him. And Fred was also a really great listener. He could truly hear people and make them feel heard, which is one of the ways he made everyone feel so special, no matter how much time you spent with him. Another reason that Fred was the life of the party was his boundless and positive energy. He always had a plan that he was hatching or a new idea he wanted to tell you about. He was constantly in motion and coming up with ideas for a new marketing stunt or a concept for a great new book that needed to be written probably by you. And I'm guessing many of you who have eaten with him at a restaurant at the end of the meal heard his pitch for a doggy bag cookbook as a way to serve the leftovers, which was one of my favorites. Fred was also a terrific storyteller, and he regaled everyone in earshot with tales about his time, tuning radio knobs in the Pacific during the war, or sheltering Lena Horne from the rain during a fundraising concert for his hospital, or shucking oysters with Julia Child at a dinner party. Hands for those who heard the Julia Child story. No, maybe just me. Fred elevated name dropping to an art form, and we loved him for it. Late in life, Fred told me that his only regret was not having children. But I think for anyone he loved, or mentored, or showered with his enormous kindness, we became his kids. And we are his legacy. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Murray Grossman, another first cousin. I have to find Murray though to unmute him, and I wonder if he's under Kathy. Looking. Let's see.
Oh, was he there with Liz? Is that him? Right there.
Oh, maybe he's with Liz.
Yeah, he's with
Oh,
Liz.
good call. Thank you, Jennifer, with the visual cues. All right, Liz Grossman.
Oh, that's Linda Cunningham.
All right, I think I've asked you to unmute. There we go.
I got it, Jason.
So you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, Fred was Fred. He was unique. He was always smiling. He saw the glass always half full, never empty. He was just an up kind of guy and always fun to be with, actually. And he had many, many interests, as you all know. And although our lives were separate in that I was in Syracuse and he was elsewhere, New York City, we still saw each other at least 2 or 3 times a year. And it was always fun being with him. He was just a fun guy.
And Santa Barbara years were pretty good too, right?
Yes,
Dad?
the Santa Barbara years were especially good. And I think that's what I can say.
And that's well said. I see Brian. I'm unmuting Sarah at the same time. Am I missing anybody else? Just the 2 of you guys?
I think that's, yeah, I think that's right. Maybe I'll just jump in. Look, I always, the thing I most associate with Fred is just generosity. He's just been an incredibly generous person over the years, and as Jason said, you know, he seems so much more like an uncle than a cousin. As a kid, Fred would send us boxes of Bantam books, and I remember eagerly opening those boxes. And because of Fred, I would look for that Bantam whatever it is, rooster that was on the books. And I used to think that Bantam was the best. I'd only buy Bantam books. In the summer between my sophomore and my junior year in college, Fred generously allowed me to use his apartment. I had an unpaid summer internship. Again, the following summer, a different internship, one that actually would become my first job when I graduated. He again allowed me to use the apartment. And then the first few months after college, living in New York City, he again generously offered his apartment as a sort of staging ground for the transition to the working world. And as I look back, those 3 summers were so important to the career I've had. If it wasn't for his generosity, I wouldn't have been in New York those summers, and I wouldn't have had those opportunities. So, you know, I'm incredibly grateful to him for that. I have great memories of all the Pfister Fests we've had over the years: Utah, San Francisco, New York, Syracuse, and of course, Santa Barbara. The last few years, as my dad just highlighted, you know, Fred was enormously generous, sharing his rich, colorful, wonderful life and community down in Santa Barbara with my parents. And it was great. I mean, it was special to see my father and Fred together again after so many miles and so many years from the early days in Syracuse. He had a remarkable life. I consider myself, and I think all of my family consider ourselves fortunate that we were able to see so much of Fred over the years. His generosity, his sense of humor, his commitment to family is something that I'll always remember him for. We will miss you. We'll miss you, Fred Klein.
And I'll just piggyback a little bit on that. I think Brian really summed it up, but want to highlight something that Jason said, which was he was also my first cousin once removed, but he definitely was more like an uncle. We definitely, when I was trying to describe to someone recently the funeral I was going to be attending and who Fred was, I was explaining he was my first cousin. Well, he was more like my uncle. And then I started talking a lot about what Brian said about the books. And I really think a lot of my love of reading came from Fred and those boxes of books he would send. And wish he was around now if I'm still at Bantam to send them to my little ones, because I look back so fondly on that. I think the thing about Fred was he was such a loving, amazing, funny, articulate person to be around, even from a very young age. I think all of us little cousins of his loved going to visit cousin Fred out in California. And also, like Brian, one of my first big trips with my mother was to a solo girls trip into this city. And we went and stayed with cousin Fred. And he took me to Tavern on the Green and he took me out on the town. And I look back at that as such an amazing, amazing opportunity. And I got to see the city through his eyes and his love of theater and his love of all of the things that New York offered, and really showed me a different side of the world than what I was seeing growing up in Syracuse. But really sad that he isn't going to make it to the inauguration, because I think he would have really loved to be here in January, and definitely miss him a lot, and think back about all the lessons I've learned from him over the years.
That's great. Thank you both. That was lovely. All right, I'm going to start unmuting the Bantam crowd. So be patient with me. All right, Esther, Richard, and Paul, in theory, you've been prompted to unmute. Any of you there?
Oh, Esther, we can't hear you.
I see Esther. I see Paul's icon.
Announce yourself.
I don't know if you can see me. It's Paul.
We can hear you, Paul.
Okay, that's good. I'm having a problem getting in.
The video. You're in. You're in.
Do you want me to get started?
Why don't you?
Yeah.
Okay. I wish I had a better operating experience, but I wrote a little something here. I'd just like to read it. What I remember most about Fred was his spirit and energy and positiveness, and mostly his fake scowl, plus his year-round tan. How did he do it? And of course, his love of music and the theater. More on that later. I worked for Fred at Bantam as a junior ad promo copywriter. To get the job, he gave me an assignment to write headlines and a one-paragraph blurb. And a one-paragraph blurb for 3 books. This was on a Friday. And he told me to bring them in on Monday morning. Monday? Freaking Monday? You can imagine my weekend. But I brought them in. He spent maybe 5 minutes tops, and that's a stretch, reading them. He looked up and without giving anything away said, okay, see you next Monday. That was it? Oh, okay. Little did I know, that was a freaking rave. I can picture him. New York City, 666 Fifth Avenue, 25th floor, our suite. Yep, that's what it was called. Of maybe 6 offices, including Esther Margolis and a publicity department and Jack Looney's promo art department. Fred's feet in his comfy office loafers up on his desk, manuscript in his lap, happy as can be. That was my first round at Bantam. I had a few jobs in between. Lucky for me, Jack Romanos brought me back. It was the early 80s, and by this time, Fred had moved on from head promo to editorial, and thus began some of my most lasting memories. sort of about books. It was fun night at the annual Bantam Sales Conference, held at the Sonesta Beach Hotel, AKA the Pink Palace in Key Biscayne, Florida. And fun night it was. Should have been called Fred's Fun Night. He produced, directed, and wrote many of the smart and clever songs performed by many, many Bantamites from all departments and countries, including those from the UK and Canada, and I think Australia. And Fred, this was Broadway, serious, clever, funny. To us, the performers, it was hell. Imagine Fred shouting and grumbling and cajoling and trying to corral wild chickens or cats or those with performance anxiety. Somehow, when curtain went up, we all performed for Fred. He loved it, and so did we. Another successful and cuckoo fun night. Fred ran Fun Night for years and years. Then he retired. He left his beloved New York City for Southern California. I could see him in Santa Barbara. His condo was literally across the street from the beach and the Pacific. Tanning, of course. There he is, sitting comfortably in his well-worn reading chair, New York Times folded just so in his lap, stacks of galleys, books and magazines on both sides of that chair. And on the wall, the actual cover painting of Thomas Harrison's Black Sunday. And you picture the blimp crashing into the football stadium. He was one happy man, a man I will always remember. I'm done.
Esther, do you want to go next? You have to unmute it, Esther. Big hand.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My experience with Fred goes back to when early New York. We're talking.
Esther, I'm sorry to say we've lost you. There we go.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so my time with Bantam and Fred was from 62, late 62 to, I left in 1980. But between those 60s and 70s were the most dynamic years of publishing for mass market and for Bantam in particular. And Fred and I guess, became known as the Fred and Esther team for a long time. I'm very proud of that. It was a crazy time at Bantam because when we first started, there were, believe it or not, there were only 3 salespeople at Bantam at the time. The whole promotion department was 4 people, which ultimately became the marketing department. Bantam went through 6 changes of ownership in the time that I was at Bantam, and then Bertelsmann being the last one. Fred, of course, his career went on way beyond when I left. I left in 1980. Can you still hear me? Oh. Okay. Fred became known really, as we both became known for these crazy promotion stunts that we would come up with. Fred especially, he was the first time that we ever had, for example, airplane banners going in the sky to promote books over July 4th weekend. Or we had snipes, all those things on fences in New York City, sidewalk stencils. He found, we were doing the book Myra Breckenridge, and Fred found the statue, the original Myra Breckenridge statue in Los Angeles that had been parked in a warehouse someplace, and Bantam resurrected, and we put the actual statue on tour. The big thing among the legacies, I think that he left at Bantam, which I certainly was part of and I'm thrilled about, was we got tired. Bantam was just me and Fred and a guy named Arnold Stiefel, who went on to Hollywood and is there, a very successful music promoter there today. 3 of us used to make the promotion presentations at the Bantam sales conferences. And one year we just decided it was just so tedious to keep doing the same thing every year. So we decided to surprise the staff and do it instead in a show business kind of way. Fred, of course, using his show business element, and Arnold was very show business oriented too. So we actually first did it literally as an eyewitness news team, with Fred being the host and Arnold and I being on the street reporters. And then we became, the following year, we became the Johnny Carson show, except it was the Freddie show. And Fred was was the host, like a Johnny Carson, and we had various performances. And it became a tradition at Bantam where mainly Fred and me occasionally, and other people on the staff would write parodies of Bantam titles, and we would perform. And so one year it became Grease, and another year it was the Tonight Show, and the Today Show. And finally, I think the last year that I was there, that I was involved in it, I think it was when we actually did Chorus Line. It became a tradition that literally apparently goes on even to this day, but certainly went on for many years after I left. But it really continued Fred's tradition in New York. The other area that became very common for us was to do movie tie-ins. Fred and I used to have this sort of dog and pony show where we would go off to LA and we would present Bantam titles in LA for promotion purposes back and forth. And so show business became very much a part of the element of Bantam promotion, and ultimately, I think, helped to bring Bantam into the public forum to eventually become the #1 publisher, paperback publisher in the world, actually, by the time certainly I left, and it continued with his career afterwards. And I think, Paul, you can continue talking about Fred after that, yes?
Well, I think Paul might be a little done. I don't want to. Paul, you want to come back?
Banner's going. Is Paul there to continue?
Yeah, I'm here, but I'm done. I've said my piece already.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Richard?
Sure. And then I think if we were to sort of look for that 8-letter synonym for Fred that he did in that Sunday Times crossword puzzle every week, it would be, as both Jason and Brian said, generous. I mean, he had that generosity of spirit and time and support for everybody that he met. You know, he would welcome people to New York. Like Brian, we were lucky enough to stay in the guest room of that apartment. You wouldn't want to stray into the kitchen. It was a little bit more like a scary science project, but the rest of the place was just, you know, inviting and comfortable and
Quirky.
yeah, and it was all Fred, because you'd get off the elevator and you could hear his music 8 apartments away. And he always had what you thought was a bootleg tape playing in the tape deck, but it was really just him recording his album so that he could listen to them as he walked to work. And he walked to work every day. I think that was one of the defining elements of Fred, is that he would, whether it was in California or New York, he'd get up and he'd be out the door and he would just go. He was the original Energizer Bunny in many different ways, but as Paul said, he was always scowling as he was cheering people on, which was really great. I realized Fred's passions outside of Bantam, and what he did at Bantam was remarkable, but it was, you know, music and museums and theater, and he taught us a lot about that. I realized I was driving in today that maybe the reason I like Tom Waits is that he sounds just like Fred. And it's probably best from those Bantam shows that there was never a recording made, or at least never went public. So we can remember it with a lot of nostalgia, and we're probably slightly more in tune remembering them than actually listening to them. But Fred was frugal. He would send his staff around 666 Fifth Avenue when they were giving away free cigarettes, and they'd bring them back to him. He also quit cold turkey, and it probably would have been 40 years ago now. It was kind of remarkable, considering he'd sit at the end of the editorial meeting in this blue haze, and he was one of those guys who would light a cigarette from the one he had going. So to go from, you know, probably a 2 or 3 pack a day guy to nothing, it showed his indomitable spirit as he sort of kept it. It was interesting, the earlier comment about how supportive he was with writers, and I think that's when he was in California, because I would go into his office, which looked a little bit like a paper avalanche, and I'd say, should we respond to some of these? And first he would take the postage off the return postage envelopes, and he'd say, I got to pay Con Ed this week. And then he'd go, how long has that manuscript been there? And I said, I don't know, 3 years. He goes, toss it. And then he goes, somebody else has already bought it now. But he always found books that would get on the bestseller list. And that was one of his marks at Bantam, how he'd be able to do that. His love of museums was really art that, probably wasn't the Metropolitan as much as it was Red Grooms and other sort of boisterous, loud and bright art. And you realize, well, that was Fred's art. And he was loving those artists for the same reason. And then theater, I think, just defined him, whether it was the music or going to the plays. And he would always be the person we asked, who should we see? Whether it, I can remember he directed us to Little Shop of Horrors as my very first play in New York City, and then Stomp for once the kids were allowed enough to come home and make all that noise themselves, which we really did want to thank Fred for. That was really nice. But Fred, when he finally left, and he worked tirelessly at Bantam, he had a year of paid vacation lined up. And I think it was at that point that Alberto changed the policy that you couldn't carry over vacation time. So his first year in Santa Barbara, well, he was still on salary, and he was still, as Jason said, picking up newspapers, would never get his own subscription. But we, as much as we tried to stay in touch with him, and I think we'll always remember him, we miss him now. You want to say anything, Linda?
We loved Fred more than maybe even he knew.
And Ian, who will come back a little bit later, has a pretty couple of special stories about the theater stuff. So I'll bow out on it for now. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. That was great. Let's turn to Susan Gilbranson. Susan, are you unmuted?
Yes, I'm unmuted. I'm here. Do you want me to start?
The floor is yours.
Okay. I don't even know where to begin. He was here almost 30 years, and I've been asked to talk about it in about 5 minutes. But when he finished at Bantam, he went to LA to be with his brother Bob. And at one point in June, he came up to Santa Barbara to be part of the writers' conference here, which was one of the top 10 writer conferences in the whole country. And he made good friends with Paul Lazarus, who had been a former vice president of Columbia Pictures and was the chair of the writers' conference, with Barnaby Conrad, who was well known. All fun people. So he liked it so much here that right after that, he moved to Santa Barbara, and he joined Barnaby Conrad, parts of our writers' lunches twice a month. And I went to one, I sat down, and Fred was across from me and started talking a lot. But he was amazing. He was not a quiet person. He was not a dull person, and he was full of conversation. And his conversation was great. It wasn't all about him, which some people can do. And he would often ask questions about the people around him, but he would really talk about all kinds of things going on, including some of his thoughts about what might be done. And I remember he would often tell me that I should write a memoir about parts of my life. And I kept telling him, you better write a memoir, because he had an unusual life. Boy, wouldn't I love to read it right now. But at any rate, he then became very part of Santa Barbara. And he was, when he moved here, he failed to retire. And he really became quite active with the literary people and nonprofits in Santa Barbara, which there are a lot. And he helped writers get their books out and give readers a book choice, which was wonderful. He also joined me working for Santa Barbara News Press, which at the time was a New York Times paper, about reviewing books, and it was great. And we so much enjoyed that. And one of our favorite feature editors was Melinda Johnson. And she improved our writing. And she, looking back, said to me, "It's hard letting go of our friends, but it's kinder to do so when they are ready to leave us." Imagine wherever Fred is now, he is already at work, organizing writers groups and staging musicals. A spirit like Fred's is never truly extinguished. He then became involved, and I did too, with the Santa Barbara Book and Authors Festival, which the news press at that time started at the turn of the century, and it became very popular. But when the New York Times sold the paper, it was dropped off. So he pulled me into it, and we co-chaired, and for about 5 or 6 more years, we joined the library, the public library, and ran it. Each year it got bigger and bigger. And we had such literary members as the library's executive director, Irene Macias, Borders bookstore manager, Kate Schwab, and author Carol Linz jumped in and kept it going. I did want to say one thing, that every year then he became part of the Santa Barbara Writers Conference constantly. And the current director, Grace Rackow, wrote to me after he died, "Fred Klein was loud, opinionated, and one of the kindest souls I ever met." For all his years as an ombudsman at Santa Barbara Writers Conference, his focus was on helping others with their writing, at least when he wasn't writing corny show tune parodies and singing them off key and loud. He was one of a kind, a wise counsel to be missed. He then also, worked with, of course, as I said, the book festival, and he said that he knew we had many good notable speakers, with T.C. Boyle as among the best. He said, I enjoy using a bullhorn out on State Street, our main street, to encourage people to come to the De La Guerra Plaza. It worked and added fun. Well, the book festival didn't get through the 2008 recession, so we had to drop that off, and he refused to retire again. This time he started the Literary Gumbo, which was a local TV channel. And over the years, 7 years, he interviewed 227 authors. And at the end, in fact, Grace Rackow, whom I just mentioned, and Eric Kelly, owner of Santa Barbara's oldest bookstore, Book 10, were the last two. The Santa Barbara Community College now has all of those interviews recorded. Among the top authors he interviewed was Meg Waite Clayton. Her latest book, by the way, is The Late Train to London. And she and her husband, writer Mac Clayton, heard about Fred's death, and they wrote back to me. He took us under his wing when we came to Santa Barbara 20 years ago. Someone loving and generous, personally and professionally. We first met at one of Barnaby Conrad's writers' lunches, and from the start, he was irresistible. Fred's multi-topic and entertaining discussions often brought writers and readers together. We often met with other writers at the East Beach Grill, a popular community restaurant half a block from Fred's condo, which overlooked the beach, the ocean, out to the Santa Barbara Islands. And he also served on other community projects, such as Recording for the Blind and Dyslexic, the Santa Barbara Foundation, and Little Free Library, which was mentioned early, which he started in 2016, and it's still ongoing. I do want to quote Jerry Roberts, who was our publisher at the News Press. He now is a publisher for the Newsmakers, another local newspaper. He once had been an editor up at the San Francisco Chronicle. And he wrote about looking back at him. I still remember meeting the two of you at the News Press newsroom one day shortly after I arrived in 2002. And Fred letting me know right off the bat that there was no way the paper was going to drop its sponsorship of the festival. I also have fond memories of breakfast at East Beach Grill, which I just mentioned, with the two of you. Fred irrepressibly encouraged me to pick up that biography project that I had dropped back when I took sick, in between the lively talk about politics and local gossip. At one point, Fred even invited me on his show, a dear gesture, to talk about the book that had been published in the last century. He was a force of nature. And Fred was close to our family, often joining us for family times, including holiday dinners. And my oldest daughter just this morning wrote and said, I will be thinking of you during the service, and a Fred's big smile. He was really a wonderful person and is greatly missed. My whole looking back at him, Fred's life added success and pride to hundreds of lives in Syracuse, New York, Santa Barbara, across the country. This extraordinary publisher, volunteer, was a superb professional, a good soul, and a great friend to so many. Okay.
That was great. Thank you so much, Susan. You guys were a rock for him in Santa Barbara. I want to turn over to the LA contingent, CJ and Gail. CJ, I think you should be unmuted. Gail, and there's Gail.
Who should go first?
Oh, there you go.
I'll go.
Okay.
So Bob Klein and I have known each other for at least 35 years. I don't know exactly. We don't know exactly when we met. We don't know exactly how we met, but we think it had to do with the LA Philharmonic Orchestra, and we were both working with them in the early 80s. So Bob and I became fast friends. I remember meeting Fred for the first time at the Ojai Festival. Of course, his incredibly adventurous taste in music brought him to the Ojai Festival with Bob. And we commiserated over things at the festival that were new agey and boring. And I was thrilled when I started working in Santa Barbara and met Susan, and that Fred would be, that I'd be able to see him more frequently. And he and Susan both joined our radio station advisory board there. So there were regular meetings and some wonderful dinners and lunches. And I think, you know, as much as Bob and I have always bonded, Fred and I immediately bonded on love of books, love of theater, passion for books, passion for theater, passion for things culinary, for newspapers, although I don't steal them. And it was such an unexpected delight to learn that Fred was moving to LA, ostensibly for Bob to take care of him. And in the first few months, at least, Bob had a few issues and Fred took care of Bob. And we were all, we'd troop over to the Mar Vista Farmers Market a couple times a month. We were a trio. They were my boys. And we had so much fun. We'd always have tea or coffee first, kind of schmooze, and then go over to the farmers market, where they held forth. You know, there's a winemaker that was a big fan of theirs, and I was proud to be with them. I will remember his modesty, his support, his kindness. I did not see him as a name dropper, contrary to what Jason said. In fact, for me, it was sort of like these things would slip out, like invested in, you know, Sondheim's musicals. What? You did what? You know, and the authors that he knew very well in Santa Barbara and back in New York, of course. But these were just sort of, maybe it was his, you know, quiet, manipulative way of being a name dropper. But to me, it was always inadvertent almost. I was one of the people that he encouraged with writing, and I feel like I must now follow through with some of the projects that we talked about, and I will. I was very honored to see Fred just a few days before he died.
One of the last to see him.
Bob and I went to Cedars, and Cedars has a really careful protocol. So it was one person at a time going to the room. And so I went, and, you know, he had, many of you have heard, you know, he had some, what I call hospital psychosis, which is a temporary, you know, kind of hallucinatory feeling that young people have, middle-aged people have. So he had a little of that, but he was very aware of it. And we were almost joking about some of the things that he saw. But he was surprised to see me when he realized I wasn't a hallucination. He was incredibly warm, asking me about my son, totally with it. And it was so, so special. I will always love him.
I will go next. This I pulled out of a drawer just now. And for, you kids out there, you won't remember, but airlines used to offer real silverware. And Fred seemed to take a delight in swiping silverware for me. I had an entire drawer full of silverware that he had swiped from airplanes and restaurants and things like that. And it was just one of those things that delighted me about Fred. And I think he did it more because as a guilt-ridden Mormon boy, I was always so shocked when he would, by his larcenous nature. We mentioned, how he stole newspapers and everything. And one of the things that I just was thrilled about Fred is that I think he loved to play the curmudgeon, but he was so warm and generous and such a great sport. One of the first things that I remember doing with Fred is I was shooting a short film with a few friends, and we needed somebody that basically to play that old curmudgeon. And we dressed Fred up and made him look terrible. And at one point I sort of apologized for how bad he was looking. And he said, like, "Oh, I don't care how I look. I just want to know that the joke is going to land." And I think that said so much about Fred and his approach to life, that he really just, he wanted to support others and really, yeah, he just wanted the joke to land. He didn't care how, what part he played in it. And I think that, yeah, for me, that generosity of spirit that they talked about was so prevalent with him, and he really was concerned about others. And I saw him, I guess about a month before he passed, as he was going into radiation therapy. And he said to me that he was mostly doing this for the other people in his life who were so concerned about him. Because I think we've talked about how Fred loved the new, the latest theater, and he would give recommendations about theater and books and music. And he was always interested in the next thing. And I think what struck me about that last conversation was that as much as other people wanted him to go through with radiation and to hang on and all of those things, that even at that point, Fred stated that, whatever was next, he was ready for it. And I think that sums up Fred a lot. And, as much as we will miss him, and as much as the world is diminished without his presence in it, I do think that wherever he is now is much better for his arrival. So we'll miss him, but I just love those memories of him. So thanks.
That was great. Thank you both so much. I'll turn it over to, as Bob would call it, the younger generation, Ian and Daniel.
Ian, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. Hi, everyone. I'm Ian. I'm Richard's son who just spoke. When thinking about Fred, I have received a lot of people in my life who don't support theater and don't support me wanting to go in it, and that's fine, and that's what you do. But I have never met anyone who is more supportive about me going into it than Fred. In fact, right before I left for my freshman year of college to go study theater, his big gift that he gave me was he took us to New York to go see 4 Broadway shows, and it's still the best gift that I've ever gotten. But every week for months leading up to it, he called just making sure we were okay with the lineup, and we didn't want to switch, because if we're going to see the shows there, they have to be the best shows, because we can't just go and get a show that's a so every week he was calling, and the shows never changed, but that's how it was. And two of the most memorable shows are memorable because of him. The first was Waitress, and it's a very lead-heavy show. And right at the emotional climax, when everyone in the theater was sobbing, Fred's just started scoffing, and he was having none of it. And we didn't know why, and everyone was staring at us. And then at the end of the show, he was like, "That was bad writing. They gave her 4 solos in a row. How awful is that for the rest of the cast?" And it was so interesting to see him thinking about the chorus who weren't getting a spotlight. And then the next show, The Color Purple, Fred was very against the lines going up before shows because we all had tickets with our seats on them. So we shouldn't have to wait in line. And so he didn't want to wait in line. So we were walking around and he hit his shin on a fire hydrant. And it was not going, it was bleeding pretty badly. So he had red shins for The Color Purple. But I think a lot of people here would have heard Fred say this, "I'm fine, I'm fine." He said that all the time whenever he was a little less than fine. But he was not giving up that show. And then as soon as that show was over, he wanted to walk home, still on his still injured shin. And so I think with Fred, the things, I mean, what isn't memorable about Fred, but the things that are gonna be the most fond and the most dear in my heart are gonna be all the support and love he has for art and the people who make it and the people who support it alongside him. Like just people who are able to make joy around other people and make stories heard. That was what Fred was all about. And I loved him a lot.
Thank you, Ian.
Daniel, I'm Jason's son, so Fred's really just my great uncle is the way I like to think about it. And I think what made Fred so special for me was that when I think of Fred, he was like a larger than life character that did so much and knew so much, but then was also such a fun, goofy guy. He was always ready and willing to do whatever things I thought of in my brain and whatever crazy things I thought of. Some of my earliest memories are of Fred reading me these little picture books about a frog called Froggy. And he had the iconic catchphrase where whenever usually Froggy misses things and Fred would perfectly ham it up with the big Froggy. And it just, every time he said it, it always got me and it was so much fun. And I still think of Fred as Froggy from those books today. And even as I aged, picture books became less exciting, but it was still ready to do fun stuff. I remember I really liked Denzel Washington, and Flight came out when I was in middle school. And my parents would not let me go because it was R and there was drugs and sex and all the things they didn't want me to see. But when Fred came, he was more than willing to take me to the theater. And so I got to see all the R-rated movies that my parents wouldn't let me take. And so he always had that really like young energy that I loved as a young teen boy. I thought Fred was the coolest. And I think that was like the big thing that made Fred so special, because he was, not only was he the guy who, according to my parents, started the first Iraq War, but he was also the guy who taught me to always grab all the shampoos and conditioners from hotels so that you don't have to get any shampoos and conditioners, and to grab the little ketchup packets and all that stuff. And so I think he was so much fun because he knew so much, but was also had that child energy that I could really get with and get along with. And it was always so much fun for me to hang with Fred. I love Fred so much. He was such a big part of my life, and I hope to be as fun and as upbeat and funny as Fred was with me as with my family.
Unmute.
Sweetie, that was great. We had a tradition of calling Fred Frog whenever we'd say, "Frog, breakfast is ready," or "Frog, you're late." And he loved the Froggy tradition. I'll turn it over to Bob, brother Bob. Floor is yours.
Hey, Jace. Thank you. I just want to tell my 2 favorite Fred stories. And one of them,
Bob has had some Zoom, has some internet.
what's happening?
You're freezing.
You froze.
Oh, no, now you're good.
Am I, oh, I just got unstable, just when I came on. All right.
Now you're fine.
All right, I can come to yours if I have to, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so am I coming through now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So September 28th, 1942, San Francisco, California. This postcard was posted by my brother to me. And as he was on his way to the South Pacific to spy on Japanese spies or whatever the hell he did down there. Anyhow, here is the message on the postcard, okay? Dear Bob, am really seeing California, tremendous. Was kicked out of the top of the mark last night for drinking too much. Very classy place. Love, Freddie. Great memories. Anyhow, the other story is a little more serious, okay? At the moment when Fred got off the plane from New York on his way to Santa Barbara, but with a stop off in Malibu, so I could throw him, what, did I go again? Am I right? Am I okay?
Good, Bobby.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Okay, good. So he was on his way to Santa Barbara, but with a stopover in Malibu, so I could have a welcome to California party for him the next day. And we got in the car, and I just had I had to say something, because in our entire adult life, we had never ever shared anything about both being gay. So I said to myself, this is going to be the time. I said, so Fred, we have to talk. And I don't know how he figured it out from we got to talk, but he got it right away. And he turned to me and he said, do we have to have a press conference? That's what I loved. Oh boy, he was fun. And while I'm here, just thank you all. So all much love back. Okay, Chase.
Thanks, Bob.
Open up.
And Bob, I think it's worth saying, Bob really did keep Fred afloat the last few years. And I think for all of us who were friends of Fred's, you know, Bob really was a superhero. Thank you, Bob. There's no pressure, but if you're moved to speak, as our Quaker friends say, do something dramatic so I can see you, and I'll send you the prompt to unmute yourself. I see Floss. All right.
All right,
There,
and we'll put
Here
you
I-
here, and
here
you've got,
I am with Peggy and some very old friends there. Joan,
Okay.
hi.
turn the light on and you can read what you wrote.
Okay. I wrote this with the aid of Cooper, Peggy's son, Cooper.
All right, you're kind of facing in here.
Okay, here. Can you see this?
Let's take it out of the pictures.
Yeah.
So Bob asked you to talk about your travel.
Yeah, Bob asked me to talk about our trips,
Let's do this.
but I have to go back further. Our relationship really all started with our fathers and the boy's uncle, John, Eve, and Uncle Hank were the Klein bowling team in Syracuse, New York. On Sundays, they bowled together. My father and their uncle. And sometimes on Sundays, if we went to the movies downtown Syracuse, we would stop at the bowling alleys to get a ride home and watch our fathers bowl. But they also did all year round, as we eventually did, and they golfed in the summer. Fred was the best dancer in Syracuse when I was growing up and watching. And Bob was my buddy. And there were a group of us that started in grade school and ended up at camp and at university and in California as friends. Both of the Klein boys and me, Nate Klein, took a trip, many trips, but it started when I was widowed and the boys generously sponsored me on the first of many, many Christmas and New Year's in London. We had the same apartment every year. The boys took care of it. And we had this splendid New Year's Eve party where we invited whoever was publishing in New York or friendship in New York or whatever ended up at our New Year's party year after year. But when we had enough of theater, musicals, museums in London, year after year after year, we ended up taking a little few side trips to Brussels, to Paris. Here's Paris. And here's either Santa Fe or Ojai in the summer because we couldn't stay away from each other and just take winter trips. We took summer trips to music festivals, art festivals. Always good company. Fred, lots of it. Every trip was truly an adventure with those boys. You never knew what was going to happen. And Fred would always have a joke or a question or an interest or a new friend, always. And how could I forget that for my 90th birthday, when I moved up to Santa Cruz, and Fred and Bob came up with a musical that they had written for me. And I thanked them, and my new friends all were amazed by them. But I want to also say, Klein means small in German. But I got to tell you, there was never anything small about Fred Klein, my fellow traveler. Thank you.
Aw.
Plus, that was great. And I know Fred cherished you so much. Meg, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I just want to raise my hand as one of those writers that Fred was so incredibly supportive of and helpful for. I'm from Fred's Santa Barbara years, and when I met Fred, I had not ever published a book. I had one that was in the drawer that looked like it was never even come out. And he was never anything but totally supportive. And when I would talk about even that first novel, he would talk to me about how I should go about getting it out there. And you know, for 20 years, he never failed to show up for me, for my readings, to support me in any way that he could, to advise me on exactly what radio I should do and how I should do it. He truly, truly was extraordinary. And for my latest book this fall, he was in the hospital when I was down in LA. And when I called him to talk to him and to see if I could come by to see him, he just wanted to apologize for not having made it to the bookstore. You know, that's kind of the guy he was. So if there's any doubt that he was supportive of writers, I'm going to raise my hand and say he was really supportive of me and of Mac too. And then I think somebody said something about his kitchen, and I just wanted to recall, Susan will perhaps remember this, the first time Mac and I were invited over to Fred's house for dinner. We literally had to fix his garbage disposal for him because it wasn't working. So Mac took a broom handle, I think, and got it unstuck because it was such a mess. So anyway, he will be certainly missed in the Clayton household and in the writing community more generally. Thanks for letting me speak.
Samantha, all yours. Thanks, Meg. He loved you and Mac so much. Samantha, did I see you saying, raising your hand, did you want to speak? No, maybe it was just praise, but I see Molly.
She needs to unmute herself.
I see Molly Ann.
Can you see me? I can't hear you though.
We see you.
Love technology.
We see you, we love you. We're ready for you.
Better. Well, we'll wing it. Gail Eichenthal and I are going to split the Nobel Prize for turning on a light switch. But anyway, I'm in Santa Barbara, and whenever we had a writers group party, it seemed to be at my house. And Fred insisted on bringing his tuna pate. And after 6 or 7 years of this, when nobody ate his tuna pate, I begged him to bring Fritos, but he insisted, and we had to hide the tuna because nobody was eating it and he would get upset. And he insisted on bringing it, so okay. He also brought this much of the good vodka in a pickle jar, and he would not share. So who else do you know who could possibly be all those wonderful things? And it was very sad when he left town, but he made a mark on all of our lives. And when I think back on all the writers whose lives and careers he touched, there's almost nobody who wrote a book during the time he was here that didn't include him as a great character in their books. He was in spy novels, he was in memoirs, he was as an FBI agent, he was a wannabe songwriter, and so he was just totally adored. And I hope he knows now, wherever he is, how much we all loved him and we're grateful for his input. Bye, Fred. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for being you.
That was great. The pate, I can really relate to that. Anybody else moved to share thoughts about Fred? I see Marilee. All right, Marilee, I just sent you a little prompt. You'll see that. And then you can unmute yourself.
Zoom there. Can you hear me?
You did it.
Oh. Let's see. I've known Bob we've known each other for like, what, 60 years? And after that, I soon met Fred in New York. And all I can say is the world should be filled with Fred Klein. He was the most lovable, dearest, generous human I've ever met. I'm going to miss him terribly. However, to speak to CJ's, his larcenous nature, I have just a brief story. I don't know if that'd be funny to anyone else, but excuse me, Fred and I would still remember and talk about it. I wasn't in New York often, but I was there on business. And he took me to an Art Deco restaurant for dinner that was very elegant and wonderful. And we had our dinner and they served us some wine in the most fabulous looking wine glasses. So I made over the wine glasses, and Fred says, well, let's take one. And so, okay, I sort of moved my big purse over, and he put it in my purse. And we just were so thrilled we got away with the wine glass. Except when the bill came, the wine glass, the cost of the wine glass was added to the bill. We still laugh about it. Anyway, as I say, it's we're all going to miss Fred so much. I can't. I'll start to cry. Goodbye.
I love that story so much, Marilee. I told it all these years. I never knew you were his co-conspirator in that. That's one of my favorite Fred stories. Anyone else want to share a Fred memory? I see Linda. So just send you a little prompt, Linda. Look for a little prompt there to unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Linda Cunningham, and I worked with Fred at Bantam Books. And I have just a few little memories, one of which, the very first time I met Fred, I was all of maybe 22 years old. And I don't know if Esther, you remember the big bullpen, and you were at one end and Fred was at the other. I think Paul was there. And I think you sent me in to give something to Fred, and I tapped on his door and I put my head in, and he yells at the top of his lungs, "What do you want?" And I was petrified. And then I grew up to, grow to work with him. And a few things that he did and taught me, one of which was that when he tanned, he said, never spread your fingers, because when you do this, then you can see the white in your hands. And I also remember his shoes, his work shoes, in that he would, I guess, walk to work and then change into his work shoes, which were this old beat up pair of loafers. And in fact, he had a rubber band around one of them to keep the sole on. And I think this is really Paul's story, in that they stole one of his shoes, that shoe in particular, and had it bronzed and gave it to him. Also, one other little story, when he retired, we had a little party for him, and one of his gifts was a revolving beach chair that you could follow the sun all the way around, and he just loved it. He also lent me his apartment, and I stayed there quite a bit, and I felt fabulous living on Park Avenue. This was when he had moved actually out to LA. And I was living in Iowa and coming back and forth to New York. Anyway, he was a dear, dear man, and I'll always love him. That's it.
Thank you, Linda. That's fabulous. Those are great stories. So Samantha may be teasing me with raising her hand, but I'm going to attempt to unmute her. All right, so you have to click the little button there to accept the unmute. There she is.
Hey, can you hear me?
We got you.
Just one thing. I was actually there at Bob's place on Park Ave, the same about time that Brian was. And I was just kind of going back and forth between Boston, and he gave us his place. It was incredible. He was generous beyond belief. I heard similar stories about, but it was like a Michelin man in terms of what he stole from a restaurant in Paris. I don't know if that's true, but I love the idea of the Michelin man. And he was just always so generous and loving and fun. I mean, he took us to Tavern on the Green, which was an awful restaurant, but fun. And he and my father had a contest, but who can put their tongue out the longest to touch their nose. And I was horribly embarrassed at the time, but looking back now, it was kind of he was just generous and lovely and so wonderful. And I just miss him so much. A lot of my stories that I would want to tell are really sort of like crossing along lines of other stories in terms of his generosity and his love. And that's pretty much all I want to say. That's it. Done.
Thank you. That was lovely. Anyone else have thoughts they'd like to share or a memory? Not seeing anybody. You can also send me something in a chat. Oh, I see Julia. Thank you. You can also send me something in a chat. If your camera's off, you can send something to me and I can see it in the chat.
I think there's something that no one has said yet. And that was, Fred was a tiger and he made us all better because of it. And from New York, you might have thought that he was in Santa Barbara with his toes in the sand, but no, he was working like a tiger. And when he interviewed us, we know we had to be at our best and on our toes. And within that tiger, there was a kitten. And when he gave you compliments, you knew they were sincere and they were helpful. And so that the tiger and the kitten, he was a good man.
That was great. It's fun to hear that side of him. All right, I'm scanning the tiles to see if anybody else is waving their hands at me.
Somebody, is that person iPad too?
I don't think, I'm not saying that. Maybe Sally? I see Sally.
Yeah.
There you go, Sally. All you.
Hi. I just want to say to Bob how much your friendship and Fred's friendship has meant to me over 70 years, and that we've kept in touch, and I shall miss Fred, his smile. He was wonderful to me when I went to Santa Barbara many years ago, a couple of times. It's showered me with all the wonderful things in Santa Barbara. And the last time was just a couple of years ago, Bobby, when you came to New York with your show, and Fred and I hugged, and that was the last time, but we did share some nice emails back and forth, and I shall miss him. And hopefully, Bobby, we will keep in touch. Best to everybody.
Thanks, Sally. All right. Making sure I'm not missing anybody. Wave feverishly if you've got thoughts that you want to share that I'm not seeing. That might be it. And I'm looking in the comment section. I don't see in the chat. I don't see anybody missing out there that's asking for it. So this might be it. You guys are terrific.
Martine White.
Martine, are you waving your hands? I can't see that. Where is Martine?
She's right here.
Oh, all right, Martine. Yeah, here we go. Martine, last but not least.
Hi. I wanted to speak for myself and for Laura Kath. When I came up from Los Angeles to TV Santa Barbara, she introduced me to Fred, who was doing literary gumbo. And I discovered that the film encyclopedia that I'd been using to write movie copy at KTTV in LA was his. So he presented me with the latest edition, fully autographed. And then we became fast friends every time he came in to do literary gumbo. And as I mentioned in chat, he'd bring in these big bags of books before he moved off to LA. And he and Laura, who did the book and Writers Festival together, she was also the Energizer Bunny. So they were both known as that. And when he had his goodbye party, I'm also known as Froggy because my mother was French. So he donated several of his frogs to me, so I see him often around my apartment.
That's great. I love that. Any final thoughts? I don't see anybody. You guys have been terrific. Fred loved all of you guys so much. I was just seeing the names. I've heard stories about all of you or met all of you, and I just know how how much you filled Fred's life and Fred's heart. And I'm just grateful to all of you for being a part of his life and for being here today. I'm going to put this on YouTube. So if there's somebody that you want to share this with that wasn't able to see it today, I'll post it on YouTube at some point next week. I just put my email in the chat, so you can get my email if you want me to send you the link to it. But thank you all. Bob, thank you for putting this together. This was really the Bob Klein production. We love you too, Bobby. Thanks all.
Bye, everybody.